Good morning. All right. Happy to have all of you, and especially if you're visiting with us this morning. We're very delighted. Boy, look at the time. I've got all day. Brad set me up. Wow. That don't often happen. I'm going to throw a change up this morning. Different sermon topic than what I had intended. One of the things that I encounter when I take a trip, as we did to Polishing the Pulpit, Sevierville, Tennessee, I have to decide before we leave what I'm going to do the Sunday I get back, knowing that I will not have 1 hour to work on it while I'm gone. So in this case, when we got home Thursday night, I spent all day Friday working on what I had intended to do this morning and decided Friday night that I don't like it. So I texted Brad and said, I'm going to throw a change up. We're going to do something different this morning than what I had intended. The text has already been read. It's 1 Corinthians chapter 12, 20 through 27. And you'll find a parallel to that passage in Romans chapter 12, or basically a parallel, saying very much the same thing. And the focus of both of those passages is on the respective congregations to which those letters were addressed, Corinth and Rome, and the makeup of those congregations. And in both passages, Paul is underscoring the differences in people. There are people with differing abilities and gifts, and I understand the presence of the miraculous gifts of the Holy Spirit in the first century church. Please be assured, I'm there. But in terms of how we would apply it ourselves, it's the same. Every congregation is made up of different people with differing abilities, various talents. So when these passages in Romans 12, 1 Corinthians 12, speak of the diversity of gifts, then it underscores how every congregation is made up of different people who bring different things to it. And everyone's important. Thus, the analogy between the foot and the hand and the eye and the ear, they're all vital. And no one has the right to say that you're not important, because you are important. And so we all work together in that regard. So when I speak of diversity this morning, as I will, because these two passages address diversity, we're not talking about diversity of doctrine. We're talking about diversity among people and how that everybody is different. And we're part of the manifold wisdom of God in His church. In Ephesians 3, verses 10 and 11, Paul writing, to the intent that now under the principalities and powers in heavenly places might be made known by the church the manifold wisdom of God. That word manifold means multifaceted, like light that hits a diamond. And the beauty of it, that's the way the church is. It's multifaceted. It contains people that are different who all contribute to the beauty of it. This morning I want to think with you along the lines of 4 people that every congregation needs. You might even title this lesson yourself. You might title it, 4 people every congregation has but doesn't need. Well, I don't want to do that. I think we're all important here, and all of us contribute somehow. But I want to think along these lines of 4 people that this congregation, along with every other, needs. And let me start with a word that might surprise you a little bit. Every congregation needs proselytes. If you take your Cruden's Concordance or Young's or Strong's or whatever you have at home and look up the word proselyte, you'll find it a few times in the book of Acts. It's used in Acts chapter 2 and verse 10. It's used in Acts chapter 6 and verse 5. In Acts 13 and verse 43, I think it is. Proselytes. There are other passages, obviously, but proselytes in the first century were those people who converted from paganism to Judaism. And in their conversion to Judaism, they underwent certain steps in order to get there. They had to be circumcised, the men did. They had to be baptized. And they had to acknowledge the law of Moses, to convert to Judaism now. So they came out of paganism. They wanted something better. They wanted to know God better. Consequently, in the New Testament, they're also referred to as God-fearers. But these are proselytes who converted to a different religion, Judaism. And some of these proselytes, undoubtedly, in the New Testament times, the book of Acts, obeyed the gospel and dropped the name proselyte to become Christian. Okay? But the idea of converting from paganism to Judaism is what's incorporated in that word proselyte. All right. For us, in our setting today, I know people, you know people, who have converted from denominationalism to New Testament Christianity. Or you know people who have converted from nothing to New Testament Christianity. We don't call them proselytes. I'm not saying that. We call them Christians, for such they are. Converts, those who have been won to Jesus by their hearing and doing, practicing the New Testament. The same with all of us. But they're converts. All right. So they come into the same body of people of which I am a member. You are a member. Even though, in my case, and maybe in yours, I don't know, you were basically brought up in it. We talk these days about growing up in the church, and that's a phrase with which I have a little bit of a problem, because you can't grow up in the church strictly until you're in it. And you're not in it until you obey the gospel of Jesus Christ, are immersed in His name for the remission of your sins. The Lord adds you to His church. You're in it. From that point on, you can grow up in it. And may you grow until the day you die. But in my case, my parents were Christians. I went to the Sycamore Street Church of Christ all the years I was growing up until I left home. And if I were to tell you I grew up in the church, that's what I mean by it. I mean, I grew up under the influence of people, my parents, who taught me a certain way. you see. And I still follow that way today. Not because of them, well, in part because they did what parents are supposed to do and teach their children. But I'm here today because of them. All right. That's not true of everybody. There are those who did not grow up in the church as we say. They grew up under a different tradition, a different teaching, if you will. And they converted to New Testament Christianity. They left the religion of their parents behind, and they came to see, to believe, and obey something else. Something the New Testament presents to us as the church of our Lord, for which He died, shed His blood upon the cross, purchased with that precious blood, and we're part of it. Now, we need proselytes in a congregation, people who have come out of the religion of their parents, and that is a very difficult thing to do. If you've done it, you know. It's not easy for you to leave the religion of your parents and do something else. But I know people here who have. And the people that I know who have done that kind of thing are spiritual giants in my eyes. Because they bring something fresh to what I have known all of my life, basically. They bring a different way of thinking, a different way of seeing, a different way sometimes of doing, and that's okay. I know some who have not been able to let go of the teachings of men, and they've clung to those teachings and remained attached to them for whatever reason. I don't applaud that. I do applaud those who have the courage to leave behind what their parents have taught them when they learn the truth and they see the difference. And they have the strength and the will and the courage to leave their parents' religion, as Paul did in Acts 22 and verse 3. Paul explained, he said, look, I was brought up as a Pharisee. That's what I was taught all of my life. And I've left it. That's a difficult thing to do, you see. But we need people who are proselytes, because they bring a fresh perspective to the way people look at the New Testament, among other things. Spiritual heroes in my eyes. Secondly, we need non-traditionalists. Now, when I say that, I understand the difference between good and bad traditions. I know that there are things that the apostles have passed on down. Mike read from, was it 1 Corinthians 11:23 beginning this morning? Did you notice in verse 23 that Paul said, what I've received of the Lord, I passed down to you. That's what traditions are, things that are passed down. Teachings and way of doing things that have been passed down. And I'm not saying that was a tradition. Paul simply passed down what the Lord had taught him to others. That's what we do with traditions. We pass things on down. When things are done a certain way over a period of time, they become set and they become traditions. I understand the difference between human and gospel traditions. 1 Corinthians 11:23 is a gospel tradition. In 2 Thessalonians 2:15, Paul said, hold the traditions which you have been taught. All right. There are traditions that you've got to hold on to. Jesus practiced tradition. Did you know that? He did. In Luke 4 and verse 16, that is. I don't think it's on the PowerPoint. When Jesus came into Capernaum, where he had been brought up, he went to the synagogue, as his custom was. And he stood up to read. He went to the synagogue because on the Sabbath day, because that was his custom. What does that mean? That means that's the way his parents taught him. And he did it all of his life. But now a sharp-eyed critic would say, you know what? The Old Testament doesn't say a word about synagogues. Not a word. And yet Jesus is doing something the Old Testament says nothing about. Worshiping in synagogues. Well, as far as we know, synagogues had their origin between Malachi and Matthew. In that 400-year period of time. Okay. A tradition. He kept it up and he did it and it was right and it was good. We need non-traditionalists who understand the difference between the traditions of the gospel and the traditions of men and are willing to relax on the latter. Who understand that, yes, we're products of the way we've been brought up, basically. We've done things the same way for a long time. Doesn't hurt to change some things. Hour of worship is a tradition. How we pass the Lord's Supper is a tradition. How you take the collection is a tradition. It can be done different ways. Expediency means there are different ways of doing things, and it's okay to do it differently. If we were to take this pulpit and store it somewhere and bring a slender acrylic lectern and put it up here, would that be okay? Or if we took this thing out altogether and the preacher wanted to preach from an iPad, would that be okay? That would disturb some people. But this thing is a tradition, you see. We need some non-traditionalists who will help us to see, it's okay to do things differently in the area of expediency. It doesn't hurt us. It challenges our thinking. It helps us to grow. Those of you who have an iPhone, you have an iPhone, many of you do. You probably know that every time they come out with a new iPhone, Apple is already working to improve it the next time. By the time it hits the market, they're already working on making it better or more confusing, as the case may be. All right. Still, that's the world for you. The world is always changing and improving and growing. And as Jesus said in Luke 16:5 maybe, I'm not sure. The children of this world are wiser in their generations than the children of light. Apple and big companies like that will brainstorm and work tirelessly to improve things in a material world more than we will with regard to eternal things. That's what Jesus meant when he said the children of this generation are wiser than the children of light. We need to learn a lesson from that. Doesn't hurt to have a non-traditionalist in your congregation. Third, we need older people. I didn't say old, I said older. Older people. You know what? I get it. If you're a young couple, you have young children, you visit a congregation, you want to know, all right, well, what's being done here for the little ones, for the preteens and the tweens and the teenagers? I get it. That's important to you. But if I'm looking at a congregation and I don't see gray heads out there, that I'm suspect a little bit. Because gray heads suggest to me an element of wisdom that every congregation must have. Those who have grown and learned we could spend time in Proverbs, passages in Proverbs that touch on this kind of thing. For example, this is not on the PowerPoint. I found this later on. Proverbs 16. And verse 31, the silver-haired head is a crown of glory. I'm glad. It is if it is found in the way of wisdom. That's if it is found in the way of wisdom. Sadly enough, it's not always found there. The silver head is a crown of glory. And then Proverbs 20 verse 29 here. The glory of young men is their strength, and the splendor of old men is their gray head. Well, I feel better already. Proverbs, I need that, you know. And I notice in Titus chapter 2, in the opening verses there, as we've been noticing in my Wednesday night class here before I left, that Paul wrote to Titus to teach sound doctrine to the older men who will pass that down to the younger men, and the older women who will do the same for the younger women. Older and younger. Older men, older women. Why does we need that? Why? I mean, people have talked about the graying of the church for years. Well, that's okay. If it's not there, again, I'm suspect. Older men, older women bring something to the congregation, because in most cases, they've been married 50, 60, 70 years. And that means something. In most cases, they have walked through coals of fire in terms of hardships in life, and they have a smile on their face anyway. In most cases, they've learned what it means to be content. And that should teach me something, you see. So, if you have older people in a congregation, you've got a basis of wisdom there that will help you to sidestep many an issue and many a problem that might divert a congregation from its true course. You need that. I guarantee you do. The fourth one. We need afflicted people. Physically afflicted. I've known many. So have you. Some of you are there. In Luke 13, 10 to 17, there's the account of a woman who was afflicted with a disease, 18 years? Long time. And Jesus healed her. So I'm not going to read the story. I'm just referring to it so you'll know. This is an example of somebody who is afflicted. Okay? We need people who are afflicted. And I'm not wishing anything evil on anybody. I'm just telling you that don't overlook or forget afflicted people. People who suffer. People who are bent over physically. Who are limited physically. Who can't be here sometimes because of those afflictions. Don't forget those people. Because those kinds of people teach us something. They teach us to be thankful for what we've got in terms of my bodily health. How well things are for me, to be so grateful that I feel as good as I do when I know somebody else doesn't. They teach me gratitude. They teach me compassion. They teach me thankfulness. They teach me patience. To know that there are people who can't be here. Jill Horton is watching this morning. She can't be here, but she teaches me something. The years that we watched Jim Howell get about on his walkers and with his canes and in his motorized wheelchair. And there wasn't a whole lot he could do. But he taught us something about compassion. Here he was, faithful as he was, and yet afflicted as he was due to polio, you see. That teaches you something. Don't overlook people like that. Have compassion. Jesus did. Everywhere he went, people like that flocked to him. And he healed them. He didn't ask them questions. He didn't judge them. He healed them. He didn't treat them as outcasts. He healed them. Got to have people who are afflicted, because those people will teach you something if you're wise enough to know it. Those are 4 people every congregation needs, you see. Because these things represent the differences in humanity that affect us all in some way or another. All right? Now, there's a 5th person that I would add to this list, but I'm going to do that tonight. I've already exhausted the time that Brad has allotted me so graciously. And he's not often that gracious. Oh, me. Yeah, there's a 5th one I want to look at tonight, and that is every congregation needs an encourager. You've got to have a Barnabas in your company. Life would be miserable without him. You wouldn't last long if you didn't have encouragers. You probably wouldn't be here this morning if it were not for encouragers. So we're going to think about that tonight. And I'm going to put that on the back burner until then. Because I have an idea, as Paul said in Galatians 6:9, be not weary in well-doing, for in due season you shall reap if you faint not. You would have fainted long ago had it not been for encouragement from somebody or bodies that have kept you here and kept you going. You need that. We need encouragement from people to see Jesus, to know Jesus, to love Jesus, obey Jesus, give your life to Jesus, die for Jesus, if it comes down to that. You need encouragement along that line. Think about it this morning. Think about the first